Welcome down to the swab with Georgie Carroll. We all know nurses have the best stories, so why don't you come have a listen? I'm so excited to have this guest on today. I've been referred to her many times of lots of people. She's called Simone Sheridan, but I'm going to call her Sim because I've read a book about her. That's how good she is. And I feel like I know her as Sim. There is a book out at the moment called The Care Factor, written by Isla Wilde.
Let's call her Elsa Wilde.
Elsa Wilde. I read the book, couldn't read those two words. It's a friend of yours that kind of stalked you a little bit in... she was fairly in your world.
She was really in my world, yeah. We didn't refer to it as stalking. We referred to it as debriefing, but I agree that she was really in my world for that period of time.
And it is a book about your role as a nurse, going from sexual health nurse consultant to being one of the kind of upskilled or re-upskilled ICU nurses, to being somebody who then looked after people in lockdown, staff.
Yeah.
You for the people in the rest of the world that listen to this podcast, she's in Melbourne in Victoria, and it's probably the place in Australia that has had it the hardest, the COVID. I'm in Adelaide.
No, we really did. We did the longest lockdown. We had the most cases in in 2 outbreaks, in fact, Yeah,
and I'm so sorry it happened to you, and I am so thankful that you all stayed in your houses and got the hang of it.
And look, compared to other places in the world, we're doing okay. But in Australia, it's a kind of standout experience, I think.
Yes, it is. So the book's all about that. I'm very cautious of not making my podcast about COVID. And when I read the book, I knew that that's not all you had to say.
No, and I feel like COVID was kind of a setting for how we came to create the book. But in actual fact, Elsa and I had been talking for quite a long time because we wrote an article together a few years ago about sexual harassment in nursing.
Read it?
Yeah, great. I'm glad. You're such a good researcher. And I think we'd always talked about, like, God, it'd be good to write more nursing stories. Like, this is something, I hadn't read lots of contemporary nursing stories. It was something that it really felt like was kind of missing from conversations.
Well, we're kind of cobbled with it because we are bound by confidentiality.
That's the big thing, hey? Like, we can have conversations around the dinner table and we can share really intimate details of what happened, but we're really kind of bound by those confidentiality factors that mean any further conversations are actually describing details in a way that might be made public, such as in this book. So hard. And Elsa and I actually had to work. That was one of the hardest things we had to do in this book, was to try and tell the story in a really honest and frank way, but protect. We didn't want anyone who'd actually been a patient to read that and go, that's me. We wanted to kind of hide their identity. So, we changed people's genders, we changed their age, we changed where they lived, but we tried to keep the essence of the story. And my girlfriend, Emily, actually made a spreadsheet so that we could see who the original person was and then what changes had we made, and then would that person feel like their privacy was being protected. And it was really complex because sometimes you change someone's gender or their age and the story doesn't make sense. And you're like, I have to try a different way of getting around this.
I'm very familiar with that. I write less about patients. I write more about nurses. I find them far more intriguing and quirky.
Nurses are intriguing for sure.
Ruined, amazing, and all the things I find, and just the dynamics between us. I love those.
Yeah.
They're the ones I tell on stage. I feel that Ailsa could probably qualify as a nurse after writing that book. She was
definitely. And as a result of this book, it's actually spurred on a new project at the hospital where Ailsa is now a writer in residence. So she's doing a project at the Royal Melbourne where she's sitting in an office and she's getting paid by the hospital to listen to people's stories and to write them down, which is really cool.
As in the patient stories?
No, as in staff stories.
That's cool.
Yeah. So whether they're cleaners or nurses or healthcare assistants or doctors, they can book a time and spend an hour with Ailsa debriefing, something that's happened or their experiences over the pandemic. And she's documenting it all, and they get a printed version of their story so they can share it with their friends and family. But then there's going to be a book collated as well of all of these stories.
I feel like I'd book in weekly for that.
Oh,
I love talking about it.
And I've seen people, because we have kind of a work social media, and people are writing on it to say, this is my best debriefing experience ever. To actually talk to a writer who's listening and taking on that story. I mean, and I feel like I'm like, yes, I stole her for a whole year pretty much. So I should probably share her around now. But I do miss talking to her because she's talking to lots of people at the moment. So I'm not getting as much time as I used to.
I can't think I've ever, I'm sure there are units that do great debriefs. When I used to go on emergency, they had security fobs that you'd hand back in at the end of the shift, and no one could leave until everybody had handed it in. And that was the debrief, but everyone just sat there and waited and said nothing. There was never a...
And the problem is, like, you have an incident happens in healthcare, and then when they run the debrief 3 days later, only 2 of those original staff are there. Do you know, like, trying to get everyone from that shift back onto another shift to debrief it. Well, that's why most of it happens at the pub, I guess.
Yeah, you're a huge advocate. Like I said, your roles are endless. I feel like...
I'm a bit of a jack of all trades, master of none. That's...
It's like you're on your first day off in like a decade. There's a bit near the end of the book where it goes, so the way I'm going to kind of decompress from this is I'm going to have 1 day off a week. And I'm like...
I felt like I needed to slow down in a slow... You know, like I'd been running for a lot of that period of time, and I felt like if I just stopped, I would fall apart. Like it felt really scary almost. So I kind of made sure that I had 1 day off and then 2 days off, and I kind of took it down slowly. But I have had holidays since, and I'm back to a better work-life balance now.
Oh, that's nice, because your work, like we know, is sexual health nurse consultant, amongst other things.
Yeah, so I'm a sexual health nurse consultant 1 day a week, and then the other 3 days a week permanently, I'm at the Royal Melbourne as a family violence nurse educator. So I work with the family safety team, and we educate staff in recognising and responding to family violence. And this is a really new area for nurses to be involved in.
Yeah, because I left 2 years ago, and I know that I've done online mandatory competencies.
Yes.
Where I learned statistics. But
it's a really big cultural change. And when I'm educating in family violence, like, it's really interesting. Nurses are experts at watching human relationships. Wouldn't you agree? Like, we're at the bedside, we're there, we see all the comings and goings, we hear the tone of voice that people speak to each other in. You know, if you're a doctor or a social worker, you come in for a session and you leave again. But the nurse is the one there, you know, changing the catheter bag, or, you know, doing a nasogastric feed, or and we pick up, people start to treat us like the furniture, unfortunately, you know, like, but they drop their guard a little. And so I think nurses are really in a position where we notice these subtle things going on in family dynamics, or things that make us worried about what's happening in the family. And the other thing we have going for us is that people trust us. You know, we keep ranking as one of the most trusted professions. So you've got this beautiful thing coming together where nurses notice these subtle changes and people trust us. So the way I kind of, when I'm teaching about family violence, is to kind of empower nurses to go, you're the gateway. Do you know, you're the way that you might be able to ask some questions, start up a conversation, and someone might feel comfortable to tell you what's going on, and then you can link them in with social work or with external services.
Having done the online competencies and things, I would always, so I'm just trying to think how I'd work it in practice if I came. I've definitely had it where I'm worried about kids.
Yes. And we've got pretty strict mandatory reporting laws around that.
Yeah. And not necessarily that somebody's meaning to be bad, but, you know, just not having the skills.
Kind of a neglect or
No one's being mean. It's not that they're bad parents. It's just that the kid isn't safe.
Yeah.
And it always ends up being an office conversation first.
Yes.
You never trust yourself, do you? You come out.
You always come out, what did I notice? And that's the thing of, like, I guess, a team working together and go, you know, potentially you're caring for a woman and you notice that when her partner comes in, he seems to answer all the questions and talk on her behalf, but he's also very charming and he brings lots of chocolates for the ward and he's lovely. But then he says a few things that make you a bit concerned, such as, you know, women sometimes, or, she just gets a bit crazy. You know, like, kind of those little demeaning things. Yeah. And you might notice she doesn't talk as much when he's around. She kind of defers to him. Yeah. So that's what we're kind of saying. If you notice those signs, can you have a time that's safe where she's alone? And, you know, potentially this is after visiting hours, of going, hey, I've noticed a couple of these things. I'm a bit worried about you. Is everything okay at home? You know, are you feeling safe? Is there any support that you'd like around this? I've noticed and I'm worried.
Said that it never seems to get received badly. You always imagine that question would get.
Yeah.
And they've got enough going on when they're sick already.
Oh, and it might not be the right space. You know, if you. Yeah, exactly. But it's been, you know, like, we know from the statistics that women who are in domestic violence relationships need to be asked on average between 4 and 7 times before they feel comfortable being able to have that conversation. So you might be number 2.
List for that in the end, isn't there? There's going to be.
There will, but we also need to kind of, the power of you asking as a nurse to go, hey, I've noticed these things and I'm worried about you. The idea is then there that they can talk to a health professional if they need to. Like, it's almost like planting a seed and keeping the door open. And if someone says, no, I'm fine, it's all good. No, I'm just they give excuses, or maybe it's true, maybe everything is fine and we've just picked up on something that's not there, then it's a great opportunity to say, oh, look, if anything ever happens in the future, or, to your friends or family, just let people need to know that they can talk to health professionals about this, because it is a health issue. I think this is the thing, we're pulling family violence out from under the carpet, where it was seen as a behind closed doors, this is something we don't talk about, to going, actually, the health impacts of family violence are huge. And we know that it's in the community. If we're not seeing it, it's not because it's not there. It's just because we haven't picked up on those signs. So I think, in the same way that nurses are kind of the glue that holds everything together in hospitals, we've got a really significant role that we could play in kind of gently asking some questions and leading people to resources and things that might help them.
I could totally hear that. I suppose if you watch a lot of medical dramas, they only ever discuss it as well if somebody comes in with an injury that's a result.
Yeah. Yep. The bruises, the cuts. Yeah.
And I've had friends I've luckily never had domestic violence, but I've had friends with it, and you don't know for a long time. It looks so normal.
No, and there's a lot of shame around it as well. People feel really embarrassed. So actually, as healthcare professionals, we shouldn't ever apologise. Oh, I'm sorry, I just want to ask you, is everything okay at home? Like, actually apologising makes that person feel like this is a bad or a dirty thing to be talking about. So actually, in the same way, I feel like this is the kind of job that I've ended up in, where in all of my roles, I try and help health professionals have difficult conversations in a really kind of normalizing it way. So whether you're talking about sexual health or family violence, the best thing we can do is to really normalize it. A lot of people have difficulties in relationships, and a lot of people feel unsafe at home. Is that something that you're going through, or you'd like to, find out more about?
Well, your role as sexual health nurse consultant.
Yeah.
1 day a week, and a lot of you. There's not a lot of sexual health nurse.
There's not. It's this really unique service. And I don't know many, I actually don't know in Australia of other public hospitals that have this service.
I've had many sexual questions from patients, all of them appropriate, I feel.
Yep, now I've got a stoma, I've had a spinal cord injury, I've got cancer, my body's changed because of this, my communications changed because of my head and neck surgery.
I just kind of troubleshooted it. I didn't know there was a service you could go to. I've always just said, well, you just bend the catheter back round again.
Well, that's it. And you can pop a catheter.
I'm just guessing that's
pop a condom on top of it, and
Will the sperm come out the catheter? I'm like, I really don't think.
Well, it probably will eventually, but it might go into your bladder initially and then come out.
I don't know. Do it. Let me know how.
Yeah. So. Yeah, there's two of us that work in this role, and we're 1 day a week each, and we're a referral service for the hospital, but also externally.
People can self-refer.
People can self-refer. Yep.
Right. Okay. So yeah.
So, but most referrals we get come through the organisation or from allied health or nursing staff members who know about us. But yeah, I was really interested in. The problem is, I'm interested in all areas of health, and I get really excited about.
Did you really do all the roles that you did in that book?
I really did.
You seem to be. You and Josh, I think it is, were the only ones like the whole time.
And since then I've taken on other roles. I was working in the COVID swabbing clinic the other day, and it's funny, the director of nursing at my hospital often says to people, look, if you can find out what Simone wants to be when she grows up, then tell me, because I don't know. But the sexual health side of things was, one of the areas that I was really interested in, but I only really thought sexual health existed in terms of pap smears and sexual health testing and, those more clinical sides of nursing. I didn't know that there was a role for a nurse as a sexual health, almost like a sexual health counsellor. Yeah. And I'm really clear with people. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a counsellor. I'm here to kind of help you understand what's happening to your body and to workshop some options. But I also feel like people feel, again, it's the comfort thing. People feel comfortable talking to a nurse rather than going to a sex therapist.
The thing, I'm more than happy to talk about it dressed as a nurse. Take me in a sex shop, I can't stop giggling. If I'm nurse, I just find the whole thing quite ridiculous.
It is.
Laugh at every penis joke. But as soon as I'm a nurse...
As soon as you're a nurse, you're okay. Do you know, when I've been into sex shops since becoming a sexual health nurse consultant, I walk in and I'm like, that's not accessible. You need a ramp there. That's not very good, isn't it? Look at the height of someone's got to reach to get that dildo. No.
Yeah, that's going to make somebody worse, that dildo.
Yeah. So I often leave with the sex door going, we do need a ramp. And these aisles aren't wide enough for wheelchairs, are they?
Yeah. If you put it in the remit of all the other questions we ask people.
It is. It's just
have you had any plans about how you want to die? Have you, all of these
right?
Yep. Everybody over 45 if they're Indigenous, everybody over 65, and there's just all these really invasive questions you ask.
But there's a lot of stigma around sex. And I think in a Western context, we think we're very sex positive. There's posters that have, sex sells things graphically. There's lots of sex jokes. You can watch any sort of movie and it's in our culture. But when it comes to actually having conversations about it, especially in a health professional context, a lot of health professionals are just like, ugh. And there's some fantastic research that's been done on patients and on staff members. And when people are interviewed as patients saying, do you have any questions? Would you like someone to talk to? They're always like, hell yes, I'd love to be able to talk to someone. And when they say, okay, which staff member do you think, which role, whether it's a doctor or social worker, nurse, allied health, who would you talk to? All the patients pick someone else. That's the interesting thing. Some people even say, look, I'd talk to the speech pathologist, but maybe that's the person they have the best relationship with. The interesting thing is, though, when you interview healthcare workers...
What's the speech pathologist going to do?
Oh, well, I guess around communication. Like, sex is a lot about communication.
Yeah, but yeah.
And my brain also went, it's also about swallowing, but that's another...
Yeah. I'm just like, but they're not like speech pathologists. They're lovely people.
Look, there weren't many patients that picked the speech pathologist. Most people picked the nurse or the doctor or the OT, maybe for positioning and equipment. But the diversity, there were people who picked the pharmacist or the speech pathologist or the dietitian. Maybe it's an energy thing and they want to talk to them about, or maybe it's a feeding issue. I don't know. I feel like the thing that comes from patient research is that if patients feel comfortable with you and they see you as an approachable person, then they might feel like they can ask you things.
You're in perfect role then. You are so approachable.
I try and be.
I always preferred the chatting bit of it. Like, I've decided already.
Oh, me too.
If I go back into healthcare, so I don't need to at the minute, but I definitely need to just go back into a lifestyle-based job.
Lifestyle and conversation.
Rather than... Or helping them, almost social workery kind of role, yours, isn't it? It's some bordering.
There is. That's what I mean about nurses. We're pretty fluid, and we kind of fill in the cracks of what no other profession is really doing as well. Like we kind of go, we can do a bit of that and a bit of that. But just coming back to the conversation about patients will talk to anyone. But with the research that's been done on health professionals, the awesome thing is that if you ask a health professional who's having the conversation about sex, they all point to someone else. Everyone points the finger. So the nurse might say, I'm sure the doctor's having it. And the doctor's like, the OT's onto that. And the OT's like, that's a social work role. And in the end, nobody is. So that's the kind of bit where we're just like, it's everybody's job in that sense. But I think nurses, we have pretty intimate conversations all the time. And we have spaces where we're working with patients really intimately. And I think it's...
I feel like I've definitely known I've known patients more intimately than I know my friends. Maybe not my family, but then my friends. Just the insight that they give you that they probably wouldn't give their own friends.
Exactly.
How they feel like they've caused it, or they...
their late night worries. Their existential crisis that's happening at 2 a.m.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. So your sexual health nurse consultant role then led you on to writing this article about sexual assault in the workplace.
Yes, because I was running...
If you are listening to this, we're going to talk about sexual assault in the workplace. So if anybody's troubled with that, I suppose I'll put a link somewhere about who to talk to or listen, and then make sure you speak to someone afterwards. But yes, you wrote an article.
Yeah. So I think it's something that's look, I'm sure I don't have to tell you this, but I think it's something that's insidious in nursing, where we tolerate a lot and we laugh things off. And
I am the queen of minimizing.
Minimize it. Yep. Minimize it. Move on.
Absolutely a minimizer.
And we get better as we get further into our career of being able to divert.
In your article, I was sort of going, that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, well, he had dementia.
Yes. Yeah.
I was sort of reading it and going...
And it's uncomfortable to think of ourselves as victims. I think a lot of nurses don't want to. If we label it what it is, which is sexual harassment, sexual assault...
I suppose the idea that you can be a victim without them having an intention.
Yes. I mean, some people do have an intention, unfortunately.
Some people do. Again, luckily not that outside of the workplace, definitely. Definitely have Me Too moments, but never in the workplace for me.
Yeah. So I was I guess most of my my experiences were, again, with people who either had dementia or cognitive impairment or something was going on.
That's where I'm at.
But And I kind of like, I did the same thing, minimized it. Okay, I felt yuck about some things, but kind of moved on, pushed it away. It wasn't until my cousin, so I was working as a sexual health nurse consultant, and I was teaching people about how to talk about sex. And sometimes in the groups when I was doing that, people would put their hand up and say, look, what if it feels hard or uncomfortable for other reasons to talk to someone about sex? And it was like, there's something else here. And around the same time, my cousin, who, gosh, I love her to bits, she started nursing. So she's 12 years younger than me, but she kind of followed me into nursing. And now she's come to Melbourne as well and is working as a nurse. And I couldn't be friggin' proud of her because she's just, so good. She had some experiences in ICU where they were very much intentional, where particularly men, there was a couple of experiences she had where there were some pretty suggestive and quite disgusting things being said to her. And she went to the nurse in charge and she kind of got that kind of, look, but he didn't touch you, did he? So, look, just get through the shift and then we'll change you tomorrow. Or that kind of dismissive, just move on with it. We'll put a man there next time. We'll put a male nurse.
As well, you sort of just decide that might be the culture,
Yeah. So, but that, when it happened to me, I was like, icky, don't like it. This is really hard, but push it away. When it happened to my cousin and she told me about that, this started a fire in my belly and I was like, this is not okay. We need to do something about this. And so we started talking about it and thinking about it more. And I jumped online because we like to research things, and I tried to find, I found a woman in Scandinavia who was doing her PhD in sexual harassment of nurses. And I was like, can I track down your thesis? I was trying to find everything I could on it. And I also started thinking about, what's the context this is happening in? I mean, we do, like Me Too, we do live in this patriarchal society where women's bodies are often objectified and
it's very hard. I found it, like I say, I'm a massive minimizer, but I felt like women around the world when I was in nursing. I didn't find it patriarchal.
But I guess it still exists in this culture, doesn't it?
I moved into stand-up, and that's a male-dominated thing, because I was like, what are you on about when I was in nursing?
Yeah.
Stand-up, and I was like, there it is.
Yeah.
I felt like,
where is this? There's
So when I read your article, I was like, oh, no, it was there. It was there as well.
It was there as well. And I feel like the people I've spoken to about this, like I think as people are starting to get the language to identify what's happened to them, especially, more junior nurses that have come into the role, they're very clear on what this is. Like this behavior is not okay. And also you think about when you take nursing, and I'm sure you've heard about this, in stand-up, when you take nursing out of a clinical context, you end up with two things, one of which is the angel, the saint, oh my gosh.
Or sexy nurse.
Or the sexy nurse.
I mean, I found myself sexy, but I don't think I'd be marked. It's like, it's not, if someone's listing my top 5 attributes, it doesn't tend to be up there, but I've made sure that no posters are cleavage or red hot lips or short skirts. And I'm not even keen on the angel thing.
No, the angel thing to me feels like, you don't need to pay us. We do this for the love of it.
Yeah, that it's somehow a woman's work and that it's just done. I think sometimes my shows can be a bit martyrish because we can be put upon.
Yeah.
So I do. Yeah, so it's weird, isn't it? But yeah, it comes out as this.
But those memes we have around bedpans and a nurse in a short skirt with a big syringe, and there's the sexy nurse thing and the sexy nurse costume. I started thinking, well, is that something that plays into what happens in real life? I think some of the times that sexual harassment and sexual assault happens from people who are intentional about it. I bet it's not just the nurse. They've done that too. I bet they've done it to potentially their waitress, their air hostess. And I think it is this kind of, it's a power over. And for someone like, a person who's used to having a lot of power in their life and who's now in a hospital bed and that power's been taken away from them, is this a way that they assert power? I mean, I don't know. I'm just throwing some ideas around. I feel like the other thing that often happened, that I'd seen happen, was that, when I was an educator of graduates, and often this happens to our more junior nurses because they're really trying to please and they're doing their best.
Yes.
And they're maybe not as cynical and gnarly as some of us that have been around for a while longer. So potentially, patients have tried it on in a different way. And the other thing that I'd seen happen was when they reported it to their senior, someone had said to them, take it as a compliment. I wish that happened to me still. And again, it's that minimizing.
I've said that.
Yeah. Yep.
Talking about their experience of sort of watching someone and having an erection or whatever. And I'm like, never have it. Why not?
Yeah.
What's wrong with you?
But this is what we do as nurses. We laugh at, we cope. This is our coping mechanism. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. We're protecting ourselves and kind of we're trying to look after ourselves by doing that. Yeah, we don't necessarily take good care of our staff Yeah.
We've already talked about how to touch the surface on domestic violence and how it can be our responsibility and should be our responsibility to call it and ask. And how should people handle it? How do I even phrase this? Okay, so the kind of situations that do happen in the workplace are very inappropriate conversation or comments about how hot you are, or climb into bed, or those.
Those ones.
Okay, so if that's somebody who is not necessarily in control of it's fairly obvious what you're meant to do if somebody is in control of their.
Is it though? What would you do if they're in control? If someone said something really.
You know what? If I'm brutally honest, I'd probably laugh it off in the staff room.
Yeah.
Not that I shouldn't. I know I shouldn't. But I'd probably don't be right. We're not going in there on our own. Is one.
Yes, well, that's a good strategy.
Probably be like, oh, you won't believe what he just said.
Yeah.
It would be more like that. Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily.
I think as well we need
real support. I don't know what would happen if I took it to him.
No, exactly. I think that's the thing is we need to have a clear, and this is what we're working on at the hospitals at the moment of actually creating a bit of an escalation pathway. So if you're the person that's just been the victim of that sexual harassment or that sexual assault, you're maybe not the best person to have a conversation with that patient about it. We're talking about someone that can understand their behaviour because you're coming from a place of being hurt and potentially you kind of waggling your finger at them going, that's not okay, you need to stop that now, might escalate it and put you at risk. That's a potential. If you did, I wouldn't blame you, but I think often the safest thing is to be able to get out of the room and actually tell someone. But the thing is, you need to know that person's got your back and they're going to actually go in and have that conversation. Someone in a position of power, you're in charge, the nurse, the unit manager, a medical staff member, someone who can come in and say, hey, that behaviour that you did before, I've heard about it and that's not okay for these reasons and we need to make sure that doesn't happen again.
It's a violence. You wouldn't hesitate to tell your boss.
No, someone slapped you, punched you.
Aggressive or violent, or you'd be straight in there.
I think the main thing is that we don't ever blame that nurse at the bedside. It's never their fault. And I think sometimes we can slip into like, oh, but you were pretty friendly with them before, or, you're a beautiful young thing, aren't you? How's he going to be able to hold back? It's like, no. Yeah. He's got choices here. Look, and when you said before about people with dementia and delirium, it's a lot harder. I think some people are able to. Yeah, sometimes you're right. People are able to take on changes in their behaviour, but more often than not, we need to focus on safety of the healthcare worker at that point. So if that's happened, you're right. What are the strategies? Are we going to go in with 2 people? Are we going to make sure that they're in a room that's right near the nurse's station with the door? We're not putting that person in a.
Well, make sure that people feel all right afterwards. Is that would be the majority?
It's real. Yeah.
It has happened, but it's always been in those scenarios, in the delirium scenarios.
And I think for some of us, we might be able to just laugh that off and go, oh, yeah, that old man with, whatever going on, delirium, he got an erection or he said some inappropriate things to me while I was in the shower. Like, oh, well, that's fine. I can laugh that off. But we also need to clock that, as a female-dominated profession, and we know that the incidence of sexual violence towards women is high, are people coming to work with a history or an experience that is likely to could be triggered by what's happened. So, it's thinking about the person beyond that incident and going, actually, we need to make sure that you're supported. So it's kind of supporting the victim to which it happened to and giving them some options around. It's a bit like family violence. I'm sorry this has happened to you. That shouldn't have happened. What can we do to support you? It's like giving them the choice as to what happens next, but then also putting in strategies to go, how are we going to manage this behaviour to protect our staff? Because we just can't expect staff to keep experiencing that.
That's it. Another sentence that is part of the minimising it is it's part of the job.
Yes. Yeah. And that's why we called our article like it's not our job. Like it's it's not unavoidable, but it's can be managed. It's that. I think the thing is we've all been brought up with this really strong non-judgmental patient-centered care, and often that means completely giving over to whatever that person is and wants to do. Yeah. And actually the respect goes both ways. And whether it's sexist behaviour, racism, sexual assault, all of that, you kind of have to go, no, we are centred around what you need, but that lies within these boundaries of respect. Yeah. It's a big piece of work though, and I think it's
support staff from patients is very much accepted as part of the job. I'm quite taken aback by it sometimes that, if a patient refuses to be nurtured by a certain race and it's just like, we just won't put you in there.
Yeah. And I think that's going to be a bigger conversation that will happen as well. And how do we support the person experiencing that, but how do we also either try and assist that person to change their behaviours and point them, in the direction of like, that's not okay, or how do we protect staff from that?
Yeah, you're starting the conversations along with other people.
That's it. Yeah,
I love that this is a role that at some point in time didn't exist. This sexual. It wasn't.
Yeah.
There might have been one in the 60s. Who knows? But
who knows? Yeah. I'm so excited by what's happening in nursing in all of these different areas.
And so you've got to have a vice. Like, all I'm saying is, you look so healthy. Everything on your Facebook page is about herbal tea and gardening.
No, it's not.
So what is your vice, mate? Like, I know to relax, you have one day off a week.
I don't. I have more than one day now. That was like, I think we're exaggerating now. Like when I'm not in COVID, I'm a really strong advocate for work-life balance, and I work 4 days a week. So that would be 3 days.
Oh, that's really cool then.
Yeah.
And some of those days off, you are a little bit of a carny, aren't you?
I'm a little bit of a carny. Yeah. Just a touch on the side.
I have a son who wants to be a carny, so it's also cool.
The best.
He wants more like, but you're the acrobatic side of it, aren't you? I love that for you.
Yeah, I love climbing on other humans and spinning around on their feet if they lay on their back with their legs in the air, and standing on awkward parts of their body. Yeah. And to be honest, maybe that's part of my vice, in that I can get pretty into that. And I can get pretty obsessive, to the point at which, like, I'm not going to show you right now, I've got carpet burns on my elbows, and I've lost some skin on my hips from the training session this morning. So, but we really wanted to get this trick, so we kept going.
Oh, that's wonderful. Can we watch you perform anywhere, or are you purely for pleasure with this?
Purely for pleasure at the moment, but I train and teach with the Women's Circus in Footscray. So if you're in Melbourne, look out for the Women's Circus. We'll be doing some shows later this year and next year. So,
and I think on every level, everything that you are, we're going to have to wrap it up in a minute, but everything you are about is about looking after each other and just making positive change in the workplace and positive change for the patients.
Creating spaces where we all feel safer. We can never make it a completely safe space, but heading in that direction.
Most of that is through conversation to begin with.
Yeah. And making it feel okay for people to ask those awkward questions. Creating spaces where people can ask that question and go, I don't understand what this means. How can we... Yeah, that's what I'm about, I reckon.
So I'm going to plug your mate's book one more time for anybody who wants to get it. It's Ailsa Wild.
Excellent. It is Ailsa Wild.
I was reading then, didn't I? I've also got a book. Let's plug that. So mine's off the charts. So thank you for being on.
It's been awesome. Thank you. We could talk for hours. Hey.
We're friends forever.
Yeah, great. I love it.
You've been listening to The Swab with Georgie Carroll. That's me podcast, but I also have live comedy shows too, and I've written a book called Off the Charts. If you want to know more about those things, please hit me up on my socials. I've got a Facebook called Georgie Carroll, and I've got an Insta called Nurse Georgie Carroll. I've got a website called georgiecarroll.com. Also, if you've got anybody that you think would be a great guest on The Swab, I'd love to hear from you. Thanks again for listening, and that's all for today from The Swab.